Thank you very much for your warm welcome. Nice to meet you all. I apologize for my American accent. I come from a little shtetl 20 hours away from here called the United States of America, New York City, Brooklyn, Crown Heights. So they tell the story of Lucy. Little girl comes home from school and she's been studying biology, the origin of our species. Where do we come from? And she's all confused. So she asks her mother, so where do we come from? Where do we originate from? And her mother breaks out into a warm smile, sits her down and says, beaming, we have a beautiful yichus, beautiful pedigree. Her grandfather was born in a small town in Poland, grandmother born in Czechoslovakia. We go back a few generations before that. They had a great-great-grandfather who wrote a very important work on Jewish law and halacha. And the further back we go, the better it gets. All the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, as the Rabbi just said, a very rich background. And all the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Beautiful. Then her father comes home, Lucy's father, and she asks him the same question, where do we come from? And he has a very different answer. His face gets all ashen. He's disturbed. He sits her down, embrace yourself. I was rude this difficult day. We first originated from apes. And before that, from amphibians. And before that, from one-celled bacteria. As far back as we know today, 15 billion years, a ball of gas. So of course, Lucy's quite confused. Her mother tells her one answer, her father another. She comes running back to her mother. She says, you told me one thing, Dad told me another. Which is it? She says, we both told you the truth. Your father told you about his side of the family. And I told you about my side of the family. So there you have it. Here at first, the ultimate reconciliation between creationism and evolution. It depends which side of the family. We can all choose. And the truth, beyond the joke, actually, if you study some Tanya, which is the magnum opus written by the founder of Chabad Chassidus, of Shnei Zalman Liadi, an entire book focused exactly on that we have two voices inside of us, the animal voice and the divine voice. The animal soul and the divine soul. One is a voice that focuses on survival, on needs, on self-interest. And the other is a voice that focuses on transcendence, finding purpose in life, selflessness, love, going beyond and outside of yourself. And there is a perpetual battle and conflict between these two voices that all of us have to face, and no one's immune to. And not just now in this generation, but in all generations. And it's up to us to choose which side of the family. Will you behave in a divine way, in a giving way? Will you be about yourself and it's all about me, me, me? Basically, will you be a giver or a taker? The title of this evening's talk is The 21st Century Jew. And of course, it's in honor of the Rebbe, 25th year, the Yahrzeit. I want to share this battle, this conflict that all of us have. Some very fascinating, I would say revolutionary contributions of the Rebbe that actually give us tools and life skills to deal with all these struggles, and all of us have them in different forms or fashion. In a personal way, as I just mentioned, is the struggle between transcendence and personal needs. Put it very simply, we all have ends to meet, we have bills to pay, we have responsibilities and expectations, the struggle between balancing career, work, and your home life. We only have that many hours in the day. Do we give enough time to our children, to our families? Then we have those other responsibilities. And in an internal way as well. What should we focus on? Should we be people who are building our own equity, or should we be givers that in some way are contributing to society? And even if we want to do both, how do you balance them, time-wise and so on? We all have, in one way or another, these two voices. And on a more collective, communal level, it's also true. Where's our focus? How much are we giving to the community? How much are we part of a larger group, the greater good versus individual needs? Which really is also the battle between, on an economic level, the two systems called socialism and capitalism. One was focused on personal gain, and that ultimately would spill over and help the entire good. Or is it one collective pool? Which not necessarily has worked, but these philosophical and psychological arguments have been raging in the last few centuries. And then there's ultimately maybe the biggest conflict of all, what some call the battle between faith and modernity. Is there room for faith in a modern scientific society? Because a few hundred years ago, it was called the Enlightenment, scientific revolutions, where once upon a time society was ruled in the Western world completely, either by the church or by religion or by monarchs. Slowly things changed and individual rights emerged. And in many ways, science, for many, replaced religion. And definitely went to war against religion. That we don't need religion, we don't need faith. We can explain things without the primitive views. We can explain volcanoes and earthquakes and natural events. We don't have to say God get angry and is punishing us. To the point that science has in many places, yes, replaced religion. But, as opposed to the predictions of the Enlightenment several centuries ago, religion still thrives. Some thought it would be all gone by now. Because rational mind, rational thinking, open inquiry would replace beliefs, absolute beliefs. So we have the conflict as well today in most of the world, including especially the Western world, is the conflict between what we call absolute morality or relative moralism. Moral relativism, rather. Which means morality is determined based on the consensus, which can change and fluctuate, or is there absolute morality, which is, of course, what religion preaches, especially Judaism, as well as other religions, that this is what God says and there are no exceptions. There may be nuances, but it's absolute, it's not up to the consensus, not up to people to decide. For example, I don't know if you know this, but at the time of the old ancient Greeks, it was considered benevolence to kill children who were born in any way with any abnormalities or deficiencies. It was considered compassion for the children and for their families. And the only ones that refused to conform to that compassion, quote unquote, were the Jews. Because Jews saw life as sacred, no matter what type of child it is. Today, anyone would suggest such a thing would be considered brutality. Even though some actually are hinting to it. But most of the consensus today that it's not compassion exactly. Yes, it's a painful life, but we see life as sacred, and we don't kill children because they don't fit the standards or live up to what we think should be the healthy type of perfect human being. So these debates, I just wanted to give a wide variety of them, rage in so many different areas of our lives, including our own personal lives, which really where it comes down to is your individual choices every moment. We live in a highly materialistic world. Today it's a highly technological world. It's easy. Things are so easy. You press a button, you have the delivery. I don't know if there's Amazon Prime in this part of the country, the world yet. But with us, 2 minutes, you could have within an hour, you could have anything 24/7. So on one hand, it sounds like an emancipated world. Technology has transcended time and space, and we now literally can connect in ways that were unimaginable. On the other hand, technology also creates a deep depersonalization. You may have many, many thousands of friends on Facebook, but are they really friends? Have you ever met them? I was once in a car being driven to a wedding with a friend of mine. We hadn't seen each other for many years. We were classmates in school. And I thought it was a good time to catch up. So I was waiting. We're both in the back seat. And I'm looking at him. He was busy texting. So I'm waiting for some break. I keep elbowing him, making him a little uncomfortable to get his attention. No, he's busy with his texting. So what does one do? I wasn't that desperate, to be honest. I just thought it was a nice opportunity to talk. So what did I do? You know what I did? I texted him. So there I am sitting right next to him, and I texted him, "Hi, how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time." And says to me, he suddenly looks at me, I see he looks at his phone, then he looks at me, back into the phone, he's like, somewhat disoriented, and he says, are you texting me? Because first he thought maybe it's a delayed text, maybe I texted him like last week. So I said, yeah, I'm texting you. He says, why are you texting me? You're sitting right near me. So I said, because I can't get your damn attention. You know? I'm texting you. So he says, okay, you can wait online. Anyway, we never ended up speaking. We ended up at the wedding, we smiled, and then we said goodbye, and we said hello, goodbye, fine. So it just captures for a moment the world in which we live. So is this called more developing, is this an evolved state, or is it devolving? On one hand, technology, as I said, everyone says, it frees us. But on the other hand, are we maybe slaves to technology? Can you get yourself off your phone for half an hour or an hour and not feel deprived or disconnected? And the truth is, if you do, you actually feel quite refreshing. I was flying into Australia, and even though on one hand it was very exciting to know you can email, and now you have internet in the skies, even across the entire, across the, what do they call it, transatlantic or trans-Pacific flights. On the other hand, I said, you know what, I used to have at least, I couldn't be in touch with you because I was on a plane. That's gone too. So when's the last time we had an eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul communication? Children and parents, friends, spouses. So technology is a double-edged sword, and I'm not going to suggest in any way that it doesn't have its benefits, its blessings. But how do you balance these two voices of the father's side of the family and the mother's side of the family? Two voices of these two souls. The voice of survival and the voice of transcendence. And here I can tell you, the personal witness sat at the feet of this great man called Lubavitcher Rabbi, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. And as a young man, as a skeptic, and a person who had many questions and conflicts, I discovered in the most unlikely place that here's a man that actually is a revolutionary. And even though it was the 20th century when I met him, that he would be, in my eyes, the first true 21st century leader because he anticipated being a visionary, a person with a bird's eye view, an understanding of history, unparalleled understanding of history, actually provided a blueprint how to deal with all the conflicts I just mentioned and many, many more. Now most people, when they hear that sounds, one second, so Rabbi, maybe he knows the Torah, he knows the Bible, he knows the Talmud, the Rambam. What does he know about contemporary life? He lived in an insulated world. And I was asked this question when my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, was published. And I was in many different media outlets and interviews. And these were not necessarily captive audiences. I was asked this question. I remember one particular interview where in America, in the United States, and he said to me, tell me something. I read your book, Toward a Meaningful Life, and I see the Rebbe covers every aspect of life. Literally, from one side end of the spectrum to the other. Personal life cycles, birth, childhood, education, youth, pain, love, marriage, wealth, going on. And social issues, responsibility, technology, women and men, leadership, and then finally theological issues like God, unity, good and evil, miracles, redemption. This is a man I hear that never left Crown Heights, never left Brooklyn from the time he arrived in 1941 till the time he passed away in 1994, except once for a short few months in Paris to pick up his mother in 1947. How did he know about what's going on in the world? He was living in this insulated Crown Heights. So it was a very good challenging question. I said, well, what? I'll tell you something. I don't think there's a man that you can point to that actually was there in history at every major juncture of the most important century of our times. He was born in 1902 in Tsarist Russia. It's a different world, Tsarist Russia. As a teenager, he lived through, personally, the Russian Revolution, World War I. And where was he when Hitler came to power? In Berlin. And where was he when France was occupied? In Paris. And then came 1941, middle of World War II, to the United States, the most formative years of that great country. Now, many of us have read about it in books, in newspapers, even those that lived through it. But he was a man that was literally there in every place. I don't know if you can say They was living in this insulated Crown Heights. The man that was there, maybe God put him there because it helped prime and helped prepare him to be the leader that he would become, to address the issues that only someone that has such intimate knowledge of these major radical changes that took place in the world during that 20th century, which still affect the world today, he was right there, and he had that wisdom and that spiritual and psychological insight of how to understand these events and put them into context and help give us, yes, a blueprint of how to approach these challenges. And that's the truth, that most people are completely unaware of this best-kept secret, which is why I actually wrote the book, Toward a Meaningful Life, because the Rebbe spoke in Yiddish, wrote in Hebrew and Yiddish, and that's a language that's been limiting and most prohibitive to most people, and therefore, most don't even appreciate what he had to say. So my book was a way of capturing and distilling some of it. And I will share, obviously, some more points in this talk here. But I wanted to give that background because we need to understand what we're talking about and what kind of person and where it comes from in background and knowledge and experience. So how do you deal with this challenge? We'll call it the 21st century Jewish challenge. Because we are, today, 21st century Jews. And we've been here for many, many centuries, long before there were centuries. We're here for almost 4,000 years. Abraham lived literally 3,800 years ago. You could say he's our forefather, first patriarch, the pioneer of monotheism, and his children and grandchildren would become the Jewish people. Interestingly, his children and grandchildren would also become the Christians, and they would also become the Muslims, depending which family line. There was Yishmael, brother of Isaac, and there would be Esau, the brother of Jacob. So in a way, Abraham, exactly as the Bible describes him, is the father of all nations. Basically, almost all people in this world in some way trace their origins to this man Abraham. And how would you like to believe that the Rebbe is in a direct chain of the leaders that went from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, in an unbroken chain till today? So it's not just a Rebbe that had wisdom and lived in very turbulent times, but also is grounded in thousands and thousands of years of history. So it would be pretty wise for us to listen to hear what people like this have to say about our world, because they're not trapped in the myopic vision of survival of the here and now that most of us are. It can give us that perspective. So what do they say? What does he say? What does the Rebbe say about this? And how we can address our challenges, each in our own particular way, and provide our children and our grandchildren and the future generations direction in this polarized world and this confusing world. On one hand, such great breakthroughs in science, technology, medicine. On the other hand, as I said, so much depersonalization, so much misery on the personal level, intimacy, marriage, relationships, which is not necessarily such a successful project these days. So, how do you balance all that? A little history lesson here. If you go back a few hundred years, to understand the future, we have to understand the past. How do we get here? Here's an interesting dilemma that I'm sure some of you have thought about, but remains one that is really almost bizarre and ironic. If you turn the clock back 400 years, just choosing a number, the Jewish people, take the Jewish people 400 years ago, 99.9999% were observant traditional Jews living either in a shtetl in Eastern Europe or in some of the Muslim countries, but were all completely dedicated and observant, committed Jews. And frankly, they didn't even have another option. The only other option was baptism, which a few chose, but not many. They couldn't even assimilate if they wanted to, because the non-Jewish world wouldn't accept them. They weren't allowed into the Western Protestant or Catholic universities. They weren't allowed to go into regular trade, which is why Jews developed all kinds of innovative instruments to make money, including the financial markets and so on. They were not allowed. They were discriminated. They were overtaxed. They were identified as Jews, and very often also massacred in pogroms or crusades, and later even the Holocaust itself. So what do we have? We had a Jewish world that was oppressed from all their hosts in most cases, except with some exceptions. But the internal Jewish life was completely intact. You didn't have the concept of assimilation. Okay, what happened in these 400 years? 400 years, we're talking about 4,000 years of history. Things changed. Slowly the winds of emancipation, as they're called today, began to sweep through Europe, where, yes, the church stopped losing that absolute power. Monarchs no longer wielded the same authority, and for many reasons, what we call the Renaissance and other changes that took place, the Enlightenment, as I mentioned, began to create a different way of looking at the world, where you don't have one ruling dictator. And who, of course, benefited most from this so-called more free-thinking approach were the Jews, because they were the ones that were most oppressed. And slowly, though anti-Semitism didn't subside, but slowly the oppression of the Jews became less. The doors opened up for them, especially in Central Europe, Germany, and in France. Jews were suddenly allowed into the universities. They were allowed to mingle. They were allowed to join and different industries and so on. And this posed a tremendous dilemma for the Jews. Though on one hand there was a gift, the gift of freedom, relatively speaking, but now what do you do with it? Because here were many, many great opportunities. But they also posed challenges, because the Protestant world, or the Christian world, is very different than the Jewish world. And I have to say that I'm saying this all in a quick way, because it didn't happen overnight. It took decades, if not centuries. But there were a birth of different ways of thinking among Jews, especially two different schools of thought developed. The first school of thought that developed would be the birth of the Reform Jewish movement. And for the record, I'm not here to judge or to discuss the merits or the lack of merits of each of these schools of thought. I'm just describing them as they were, and you can look it up yourself. And what is Reform Judaism? Exactly as its name implies, reforming Judaism. So though Moses Mendelssohn himself was an observant Jew, but his thinking, and especially his students, began to shift and change, and they said, you know what? The expression was, a Jew at home and a Goy in the street. We'll have the best of both worlds. At home we'll retain our traditions, but in the street, when we mingle with the non-Jewish neighbors and our non-Jewish hosts, we will be like them. The problem is, it sounds very good on paper, but it doesn't work. Because what happens if your next door neighbor invites you to a Christmas pork meats dinner? Is this a Jew at home or a guy in the street? To just put it in very blunt terms. And therefore, Mendelssohn's students, Geiger and others, determined that, you know what, Judaism has to go through major reform, and they essentially declared that we have to cut out everything from Judaism in the Torah that is primitive, in their words. All the laws related to the temple, purity and impurity, offerings, entire sections. What we will retain is the beautiful moral values of charity, of inviting guests, of other type of social justice values that the Torah provides. And this became an entire movement that affects the Jewish world till this day, an approach that literally, for the first time, severed the connection to a Torah that was given by God, was more inspired by, and we as human beings evolve with the times, and therefore also our traditions can evolve. Again, I'm not discussing the merit, this is the thinking. And the logic was, we now have new opportunities. We're no longer living in a shtetl, we're no longer being discriminated against, so why not mix and mingle? Now you can imagine, it's very hard to keep, once the Pandora's box is open, it's very hard to really cross the line, really draw the line. Just to show you how far this went, when the Reform movement moved to the United States, so there was a thing called the Pittsburgh Platform. It was a conference of rabbis and leaders here in the United States, not here, where I live in the United States. And they came out with a declaration of 10 principles. And one of them is the key one I want to emphasize was, let us change Shabbos from Saturday to Sunday. This you can look up, this is not a joke. Why? Because we're celebrating Shabbos anyway. Might as well, why do we have to stand out from our Protestant and Catholic neighbors? The logic makes sense, right? But that was not embraced or adopted, not in the United States and not in Europe, because everyone saw that was already a line. Just instinctively, people realized, well, that might as well change it to Christianity. So what makes us Jewish? So that never was adopted. But that just tells you that once you start using your own logic, where does this roll? Where does it end? That was one school of thought, dealing with what? With the conflict I mentioned before between faith and modernity. It may be a very well-intentioned plan to reconcile the two, however difficult it is to do, or impossible. Another school of thought was born in Eastern Europe. You could call this the birth of the ultra-Orthodox movement, which took exact opposite approach. Now that the ghetto walls have been removed, and now that we have the opportunities that we've never had before, they're not opportunities, they're evils. They're the work of the devil. And the world is an enemy of ours. So though the non-Jewish world is embracing us or allowing us into the world, we have to create our own blinders, our own man-made walls, and insulate ourselves from these challenges, because they will cause us to assimilate, to intermarry, and to lose our Jewish identity. And their approach was the opposite extreme, which is what? To not allow ourselves to mix with the world and to see it all as an enemy. It's two schools of thought. Now here's the interesting dilemma. Here's the interesting insight. If you think about it, both these two extremes, which are like extreme left and extreme right, suffer from the same theological problem. You know what that is? That the universe and the modern universe cannot coexist with God. So you either have to escape into the divine, into godliness, or you have to escape into the material. The two cannot coexist. One thinks the world is its enemy, the other thinks that the only way to change is you have to reform and change the laws of the Torah. These two cannot coexist. But thank God, in a little town in Russia, a man was born approximately the same time. His name was the Baal Shem Tov, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. And he would become the founder of the Hasidic movement. And in a direct line, 9 generations later, is our Rabbi that we just are talking about, or honoring his 25th yahrzeit here this evening. And what did the Baal Shem Tov teach? He taught that the most famous prayer of all is what we say every day, several times a day, Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That last word, Echad. That one God. And here's the key thing. It's not just one God and not many gods. It's not just one and no duality or plurality. It's one reality. It's one reality. Because God is omnipresent. And the same God that exists in Yom Kippur, in synagogue, the holiest moment of the year, is that same God exists right now on a Sunday night here in Melbourne. Because you can't separate God into parts. The only difference is the levels of revelation. So what Judaism fundamentally believes, and this had to be taught now in the period of time where this became a conflict. Once upon a time, this didn't have to be articulated. Because there was no other option. There was only one option for Jews. Now that there's two so-called options, so Shem Tov taught, and this was developed comprehensively by the Alter Rebbe of Shneur Zalman, which became the basis of Chabad Hasidic thought, and then finally elucidated by the generations after that until the Rebbe, who translated it into terms that are relevant and palatable to the 20th and 21st century, that is one reality. And everywhere you turn, and every experience, 24/7, has divine energy waiting to be released. So the world is not our enemy. The world is part of God's creation. It's a challenge. But like any challenge, we're given the strength and the power to release the divine energy, yes, in technology, and in the Western world, and every aspect of it. Yes, is it easier to live in an insulated world where you don't have this challenge and just live like in your mother's womb? Of course it's easier, but that's not the purpose, that's not the kavanah, that's not the intention. The intention is to enter into a world that has a challenge, like I said, two souls, the animal soul and the divine soul, and to choose correctly. So both options are absolutely unacceptable. The option to compromise our spiritual integrity and the divinity of Torah and every detail of it is misinformed. It's misunderstanding that all those laws are not primitive. That if you interpret them correctly, they're relevant today just as they were then. And the other option, to escape into an insulated ghetto and ignore the world around us, seeing it as an enemy, is also not acceptable. And today, that becomes quite obvious, because today on your mobile phone, you can't build the ghetto walls. Everything is right there. What are you supposed to do exactly? So fine, you could find some filters, but that doesn't usually work because the people that create the filters are the ones that need to be filtered. You know, it's like, maybe for your children you can control. It's like I don't know about here, but the industries in the United States, the ones that manufacture radars to catch cars that are speeding, are the same ones that manufacture radar detectors. It's like the same one developing the mousetrap and the mouse. You know, so first they sell the radars to the police, and then they sell radar detectors to the drivers. And they're constantly improving each one, so that's a great business model. You know? So, yeah, so if you have any ideas, maybe you can develop that here. Maybe they have already developed it here. It's always that way, you know. The thieves, like they say, the first you work for the IRS in the United States, and then you're hired by the big firms to figure out how to to use the loopholes that you created for them, you know. So the point is that there is no insulation today. And what does the Rebbe teach regarding all this? Tremendous lesson when you think about it. The best defense is offense. You can put up walls from today till tomorrow, and maybe it'll help for a while. But you put people on the offense. You turn Jews into active and proactive leaders. A leader is influencing and not being influenced. You just saw it on the video, and I can share even more details about it. But the Rebbe's approach to everything was that we are here on a mission, and we have an objective, and we must initiate. My father was a journalist, and he would often tell me that there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. And today in the world of fake news is a fourth category. They tell you what happened and never happened. That's not relevant to this discussion. We are Jews who have led the way from the beginning of time. And it's interesting. I grew up in a very religious Chabad Hasidic home. And I was always disturbed when I saw conformists, including religious conformity. Because something bothered me about it. It seemed like not natural. And then I wondered to myself, one second, Abraham was a complete non-conformist. He stood up to a whole pagan world and single-handedly introduced a concept that was completely radical. That life is not just about you. Life is about giving, about being charitable. And he was persecuted for that. He was one and one alone. And Moses was another radical revolutionary that was a pioneer. And you look through history, they're all pioneers. Mordechai in the story of Purim, everybody's bowing to Haman. Everybody's worshiping the CEO. And Mordechai says, no, I don't bow. We bow to one God, we don't bow to human beings. And he got into trouble for it. And he almost caused a tremendous genocide. Because Haman said, what does that mean? It incited him. But he did not conform, and he did not succumb, he did not surrender. Because he knew that we answered to a higher authority. And I can tell you that without question. For some reason, over the thousands of years, Jews did become somewhat conformist. And religion has become, most people will associate with conformity, with condescension, with judgment. I don't know about here, but in the United States, people love rabbi jokes, anti-rabbi jokes, I should say. I know in South Africa, the first time I did that, they were shocked. You know, but I think in the defiant Australia, I think it's different. So I told a joke there, and I remember everyone looking at me like, I'll share it here, and you'll tell me if it's appropriate or not. Okay. So they tell this joke about this rabbi, these two guys get lost in a hot air balloon, and they don't know where they are, and they're looking around, they look down below, they see a guy, and they say, where are we? And he yells up to them, you're in a hot air balloon. And then a gust of wind comes by, whisks them away, and they're back to square one, they're lost. And they say, what was that? So one guy says to the other, it must have been a rabbi. He says, how do you know? He says, because what he said was true, but irrelevant. I'm not talking about the rabbis in this synagogue. I just want to make sure. But, now, from the laughter I see it resonates, that's good. And whenever I speak to audiences, I know immediately from the volume of the laughter where we're at. As people say, that's exactly true. He's a nice guy, but I don't know what he wants from me, you know. Tell you another one. I'm not just saying to lighten the mood here, there's a point I want to make. So this is called the Woody Allen jokes. Woody Allen, self-hating Jew, who makes all these jokes, and they're very sharp, and they're very funny, and very biting. So a guy comes to a rabbi, I hear that the Torah and Judaism has the answer to all my life's issues and problems. Yes, it does. Will you teach it to me? Of course. How much will it cost? He says, how could I charge you? God didn't charge the Jewish people. Moses didn't charge them for teaching it. How could I charge you? The guy is doubly impressed. He's going to get the secrets to life, and it's free. Where do you get that today? Anyway, they sit down. There's the punchline. And they sit down. They open up the Torah. It's all in Hebrew. The rabbi says Hebrew lessons will be $20,000. That was even louder laughter. I hope you didn't get trapped in that scam. But what's the point I want to make? That these jokes, which on one hand are very funny, but they're also tragic, because they happen to be true. Unfortunately, there are many con artists out there, and there are many people who misrepresent religion, and that's why religion has a very bad rap. And I will not defend it, because people who do that actually are misrepresenting and embarrassing, and I would say desecrating God and religion. And I can tell you, again, I don't know Australia so well, but in the United States, and I deal with many different audiences, this is a major issue. Statistics show that 90% of Americans, and this may be true here as well, have some form of God and spirituality in their lives. And 40%, you have 40% associated with the religion. That's not a small discrepancy. That means that religion and spirituality have no connection with one another. One is associated religion with ritual, community, prayer, houses of worship. If you use some negative terms, condescension, judgment, anger, punishment, these are free association words that I can tell you from experience that people will use. They're all honest. And spirituality is seen as free-spiritedness, transcendence, music. More people would associate with spirituality than prayer or synagogues. And that's why I believe that young people have replaced religion and very often with music. Music is like a prayer, a rock concert is like a cathedral, and maybe a Grateful Dead concert is like a pilgrimage with all the incense and all the substances necessary to achieve higher states of consciousness. You get what I'm saying? So, the fact is we live in a world where there is, unfortunately, a very tenuous and I would say even dichotomous relationship between religion and spirituality. And what does the Rebbe come and teach? And what does Hasidic thought come and teach? That they're one and the same. That Judaism consists of a body and a soul. There's the technical part of Judaism, and there's the spiritual part. The technical, without the spiritual, is like a body without a soul, which, without sounding morbid, is a corpse. It's dead. It's hollow. So here's the story. I was traveling to a city called Santa Cruz, California. You ever heard of it? Anybody been there?
Yes.
Okay. Santa Cruz, California is an hour south of San Francisco. One of the stopovers when you've traveled from Australia to New York. And it's a very interesting town. It's situated between the Pacific and mountains, so it has its own climate. As a hardcore New Yorker, it's antithetical to New York in every possible way. You go there, people don't seem to have a job. No one's rushing anywhere. Horns never honk, which I believe is also the case here. So you have something more similar to Santa Cruz than to New York, And I even saw a group of young people just milling about, and I asked, I thought they were going to a movie or something. No. What are you doing? We're in bliss. So I didn't ask them whether it was natural or induced. But then I spoke in a place called the Gateways, not the Jewish one. It's a New Age bookstore on the main street. And there was like a good 200-300 people came to hear me. It was like very nice and warm. It's a spiritual town, you can tell. And you can tell a lot of Jews. How can you tell a Jew? Well, I have ways. It's usually connected to the nose or the nose job. Yeah. In other ways. So I'm speaking there about God, spirituality. I was very comfortable because I wasn't dealing with this hardcore, difficult audience. These were people who all were open to anything that was spiritual. But their spirituality, they would tell you, came more from things like Zen Buddhism and a thing called LSD, which is not an acronym for Let's Start Davening. And I gave my talk. After my talk, a woman stands up and she says the following. She was in the back of the room. She says, I was born and grew up in a family in Borough Park, Brooklyn. Borough Park is a very, very religious Jewish community. I went to Beis Yaakov, which again, a very ultra-Orthodox school. And I could see from her accent that she knew Yiddish well. And she said, as a teenager, I had a nightmare of a life. I went to school, but any question I asked, and I was a very curious girl, I was silenced. And they told me, be quiet, so be like your mother and good Yiddish above it, and stop asking questions. My parents, she said, were Holocaust survivors, one angrier than the next. Life was all about guilt and fear and punishment, and God will do this to you and that to you. And I was really a seeker, and I was really looking for answers. At some point, these were her words, my soul was asphyxiated. I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. So finally, when I was 17 years old, I decided I had to build up the courage, and I'm out of here. I left home. I traveled to the West Coast. From the way she described it, it sounded like the late 60s. And I never looked back. My parents surely sat shiva for me. And I found my God. I found my God here in Los Angeles first, and then San Francisco. Then I ended up here in Santa Cruz, and I am at peace. And she said exactly that. I found it in Buddhism, and I found it in LSD, and I found it in other psychedelics and other experiences. And I'm at peace. I haven't seen a rabbi like you, she said, 20 years. Standing here, and where did you get all this stuff? Everything you said I really loved. It's not the Judaism I learned. Where did you get all this? So, I saw other people in the room. They also had a similar question. So, my short answer, I said to her, well, we Jews have this thing called the 613-step program. You know? So she laughed and she said, okay, I understand. Then later it condensed to 12 steps, whatever the amount. And then after the evening, after everybody dispersed, she and a few, maybe 4 or 5 others remained. And we had this long marathon conversation into the wee hours. The store closed at 1 a.m. Then we went outside. It was a beautiful evening. We sat at a park bench. And we had, these conversations about life, existential loneliness, about good and evil, about the Holocaust, you name it. Purpose. And it was very warm, very heartwarming. And I shared with her the following. It's a parable I once heard. I don't even know the source, but it's a great parable. And it was that when the world was created, God created the nightingale. Nightingale is a bird with a beautiful voice. And the bird came to God and said, thank you so much for giving me such a gorgeous voice. However, one problem. I may be one dusk, perched on a branch, serenading into the night, and everyone's enjoying my melodies. But there's a predator on the prowl, looking for a good meal. He'll be attracted to me, to my voice, and I'll be his dinner. So God, please give me something to protect myself from my enemies. So God offered the bird a beak, a sharp beak, which is a form of defense. It's like razor sharp. The bird inspected the merchandise and said to God, no. An elegant bird like me with a nose like that, no. Okay. So then God offered the bird a set of claws. Another sharp defense. Claws to protect itself. And again, the bird said, it's not becoming for a bird like me. Finally, God said, okay, I will give you a set of wings. Wings. The bird inspected the merchandise, looked at the wings, and said, I don't understand you. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such design. I have enough body weight to carry with me. And you give me 2 extra pieces of dead weight of flesh. Just may weigh me down even further. So of course God responded, no bird, no little bird. These are called wings. And when you learn to use them, you can soar and fly and escape anyone that wants to attack you. So I told this woman and the small group I was speaking with, I said, look, I'm not here to judge you. I don't know what I would do if my soul was asphyxiated. So I'm not challenging or judging what you did when you left your home and left your tradition and your family. But I will say, they only taught you half the story. They taught you the mitzvahs, the laws of Judaism, but only the technical part. And the technical part, there's a lot of body weight. If you study Judaism and its commitments, it's a lot of weight. Let's be honest. It regulates every part of life. How you wake up, how you go to sleep, how we love, how we're born, how we die. sexuality. I mean, just look at the laws of Passover. If you remember how your grandmother did it. It's like an OCD holiday, you know? And you look at every detail. I don't know if you know this, but for example, the Torah even tells us in what order to cut your nails. Did you know that? Or how to tie your shoelaces. So if you look at it on the ostensible level, it's a lot of weight. And one can wonder, I don't understand why I have to do all these things. God really cares if I turn on a switch on Shabbos? So the moral laws and the ethical laws, fine, that makes sense to us. But that's the body of Judaism. It's called, in the Zohar, the body of the Torah. And it's the technical, it's the mechanical part. But then there's another part. This extra weight happens to be wings. And if you don't know how to use the wings, it sounds like dead weight. But if you do, it can lift you to places you can never reach without this extra weight. And there's no bird on earth, even a bird on a diet. And birds don't go on diets, only we do. Even a bird on a diet will reject. No bird will reject the wings, even if it makes you weigh more, because the bird knows where it can lift you to. So the saddest thing is to see a bird that's grounded. And even sadder, I said, was to see a bird that has wings and doesn't know it can fly. Let me tell you what happened. The woman started crying. The other people started crying. And I started crying. So we had this crying session. A healthy crying session. It was. It was very healthy. Because it was about something, a deeper truth. Sometimes you see a missed opportunity. And the woman, said, literally, she said, why did no one ever tell this to me? I had no clue. Now, of course, I had to be a little more disruptive. So I said to her, if you really want to be radical, I'll tell you what you should do. You should move back to Borough Park and open up a Chabad house. And teach 17-year-old girls what you were not taught. I haven't convinced her yet to do that. But I'm pushing her. Now I keep telling, we write emails to her and say, look, what you've done, you've chosen the path of selfish spirituality. You're taking care of yourself. How many other people are being helped by it? We're ready at that point, I can say that. Anyway, it's an interesting exchange. My point, however, was the story was, I learned this from the Rabbi. He taught, I would say, not a new idea, an idea that was always part of Judaism that was forgotten. That when that split took place a few hundred years ago, between the schools of thought, whether it was a one extreme, that Judaism has to be compromised because it's not consistent with the modern world, or you escape into Judaism and ignore the modern world. The Rebbe taught, very simply, it's not correct. Once you know that the mitzvahs and every part of it has a soul to it, and once you know that everything in existence has a soul and a divine spark to be released, then every detail of your life, whether you're eating or drinking or walking or traveling or vacationing, business, everything, not just Yom Kippur and Shabbos and kosher and so on. Everywhere you go, there's divine energy waiting to be released. So there is no dichotomy in truth. It's up to us to uncover that intrinsic unity that exists within the world. Now you tell me if that's not a radical idea for our times. The truth is, as I said, it's grounded completely in Hashem Echad. It's something that the Jews always knew. But they were never challenged to have to articulate it. When the Jews lived in the Israel during the times of the temple, or when they were in the wilderness with Moses, or when they were living in Shtetl and they were insulated, it wasn't articulated because they picked up a certain integrity just from the smell of the chicken soup in their grandmother's kitchen. But now we don't live in a world like that. This world is a very different world. We live in an open world, exposed to everything. So lesson number one is that the best defense is offense. We are leaders meant to initiate. And what do we initiate? The discovery of divine energy everywhere we go. These are two, I would say, revolutionary concepts that come from Hasidic thought, but articulated and actually demonstrated by the Rebbe. That's why by the Rebbe there was no difference who walked by dollars. Whether it was a religious-looking person or a non-religious-looking person, a secular person, a Jew or non-Jew. Because godliness is everywhere. Where's this distinction? Obviously we have distinctions. But the fundamental principle is that whatever you do and every opportunity that comes your way is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to express the divine. This is what I grew up with. And this is what I committed my life to. This is what I teach. This is what I write about. Are we perfect human beings? Obviously not. We all have the struggle. The same struggle Lucy has. She has her father telling her about one side of the family. and a mother on the other side, but we have a choice to be made. One of my favorite stories is the one with the Baal Shem Tov. I mentioned him before. So he had a student who he once sent on a mission. And this student came back, fulfilled the mission, and the Rebbe, Baal Shem Tov, asked him, what way did you travel to go ahead and fulfill this mission? He wanted to know the details, which seemed trivial. Who really cares which way he traveled, this way or that way? He got the job done. His name was Mordechai Rappaport. So he started to explain. He said, the first night I traveled through this and this town, I stayed in an inn. The next night there was nowhere to sleep, so I camped out on the side of the road. I woke up in the morning, washed my hands, said my prayers, and then I sat down to have something to eat. There was a little spring of water at the side of the road, a brook of water. So I took some water and made a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvarim. The blessing you make on water. And the Baal Shem Tov jumped up with excitement and said, that spring of water was waiting there from the beginning of time for you to come and make a blessing on it. That's the story. I find the story mind-blowing, frankly. Why? Because I travel a lot and I've been to many places and I always think about it. I said, was there a Jew here once? Did someone walk in this room? Did someone travel here? And maybe the entire universe was waiting for me to come there and do a mitzvah. And I don't mean just for me, it means each one of us. Imagine looking at life that way, that every aspect of your life is an opportunity that's been waiting from the beginning of time for you to come there. Not out of arrogance, but it's a humble responsibility. And I saw the Rebbe, he lived that life like that. Everything was exactly that. And interestingly, even setbacks, even things that didn't seem positive, was always an opportunity. Everything was some spiritual opportunity. People talk about, I'm bored, I have nothing to do. They tell the joke about this old Jew sitting on the bench, he's all depressed. A guy comes over, what are you so depressed about? He says, my wife is very angry at me. He says, what's new? She's always angry at you. He says, no, this is special. What happened? He says, this morning she went to work and she asked me, what am I going to do? And I told her, nothing. And she said, you said that yesterday. And I told her I wasn't finished. So we live in a world where people can master the art of doing nothing. It's called being a couch potato. And they think it's like some type of accomplishment. Then there is the attitude to life that everything is something. We're not bored. You know why? Because we initiate. Everything is waiting and brimming with pulsating energy, waiting for it to be released. And each of us, each one of you is allocated a certain amount, as the Kabbalists put it, divine sparks. And those sparks are embedded in your work, in your home, in your food, in your entertainment, whatever you're going to do, wherever you travel. And you have two options. Are you going to ignore it and be busy and distracted by other things, or are you going to recognize that that's an opportunity to release a divine spark and energize your own life and the people that you meet? I would say that's a pretty powerful way to look at life. And that's what the Rebbe taught us, by example and by words, to look at life. And that is the ultimate 21st century Jew. A Jew who sees the challenges of our time very different. We are not dealing with the challenges of the Holocaust, thank God, or the pogroms, or the oppressions. Today, Jews are relatively comfortable. You can send your children to any school you wish. You can be pious and observe Judaism without anyone, no fears. My father used to tell me they went to sleep. He lived in Stalinist Russia. All night they were in fear that someone's coming to arrest them. People waiting outside of a synagogue to see who comes and make a list and then round them up. This is not reality today. So what is our challenge? We have a different challenge. It's called apathy. The comfort zone of our lives. We're comfortable. Obviously, I know everybody has their challenges and we have all kinds of discomforts. But most of them are nothing pale in comparison to what our grandparents had to deal with. So our grandparents, when they were running from the Nazis, didn't have time to say my needs are not being met in my marriage. They didn't have time for luxuries. And I'm not suggesting that we should not have the best possible lives. But think about it for a moment in comparison. Sometimes it can be quite humorous and comical what we think is a problem. But that's our challenge, is not to be apathetic. The guy that said to his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. That's apathy. It's kisapeth, indifference. So the Rebbe came a live energy, source of life, and would not let people rest. Literally. Did not let anybody that came in his orbit rest. We're here to change the world. We're here to finish this long marathon that began thousands of years ago, pioneered by Abraham, continued through each generation, and now our time is not to be apathetic, to be leaders that initiate, that make things happen, that look for the sparks wherever we go, that wherever you meet is an opportunity to say a kind word, maybe to study something together, to do a mitzvah together, invite them to your home. Initiate. See yourself as a leader, as a proactive person. Now some of us have opportunities that reach large amounts of people, and some, one person, two people. This isn't about quantity. It's about quality. It's an attitude. And whoever was in proximity of the Rebbe felt that leadership quality. Look, the Rebbe's not here 25 years. People wonder, how is it possible? I'm asked all the time, journalists ask, can a company survive without a CEO for 25 years? It can't survive with a CEO, usually. For 1 week, for 2 weeks, for 25 years. So my response is very straightforward. I say the Rebbe is not a CEO and Lubavitch Chabad is not a company. We're talking about a spiritual movement. And what the Rebbe did was ignite the spark in people to be leaders. It wasn't about worshiping some cult personality. He inspired people to be leaders and to own their decisions and to travel around the world and build homes and synagogues and houses of worship and community centers like this one right here and thousands of others. Inspired by the Rebbe and continue to be inspired. You tell me, that's a model that everybody would love to be able to emulate. That the leader is not even here physically, and his movement continues to not just survive, but thrive and grow, double, triple, quadruple. Yes, it's because he struck them in their hearts and when they were young, and they feel the responsibility and the gift to make a difference, and they will lead. And it's not easy, as you know. To build centers costs money. Raising money is not easy. Am I right? Try it out, you'll see. You know, the guy that gets up at the synagogue and he says to his congregation, he says, look, we have a hole in the roof and we need $100,000. We have good news and bad news. The good news is we have the money. The bad news is it's in your pockets. You know? That's one risk, okay? So, it's not the point, by the way, of this talk. It's to leave this up fundraising, in case you were wondering. Like $20,000 for the Hebrew lessons, right? But I couldn't resist the joke. So on a concluding note, my friends, it's an honor for me to be here in the Melbourne Jewish community, you know, because you think about it, the miracle that each of us is, especially here. Well, how did Jews get to Melbourne anyway in the first place? You know? And many ran away from the Holocaust as far as they can in this planet. And other reasons that brought us. But as I said before, God leads the footsteps of a person. So wherever we are in the world, we are here on a mission. And we're sent, there's a reason that you're here. You're here not just to make a living and have a comfortable life. You're here to make some change. To initiate change. And what kind of change? Moral change. And a change that will make this world a better place. What we call a world of Mashiach, a world where goodness will prevail, where spirituality will dominate over materialism. Not a world where there's no material world, but it's all driven for a higher purpose. So I want to conclude and say a blessing to each one of us. And may you live up to the calling that you were given. There's nothing greater than fulfilling the mission of your life. Oliver Wendell Holmes writes in this tragic poem called The Voiceless. He says, alas, to those that die with their song still inside them. Alas, to those that die with their song still inside them. The Rebbe taught that each of us have a song within us. This is what Judaism teaches. You don't need anyone to give it to you. You just need to uncover it. Like Michelangelo said when they asked him how does he carve those beautiful angels in the marble, he says, I see the angels trapped in the marble and I carved and set them free. They're inside and they're trapped in the marble or in concrete or in other substances. What we need to do is carve, and that's how we help each other. We inspire each other. The synergy of coming together, of speaking, of conversing, communing. And that has a way to chip away and chisel away at these different things that we're trapped in and allow the angel, the song, to emerge. So may each of your songs emerge and have the courage to sing them. And together we create this grand, synergetic symphony, cosmic symphony, where every musical note is indispensable. At the same time, we all complement each other. And all together it accumulates to be what we call the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema, which is a world, personal and global redemption, where it's redeemed from what? Redeemed from the concrete or the marble that we're trapped in, and we can really live up to what we're calling for which we were created. And I want to say a personal thank you, obviously to all of you, but my biggest thank you is to the Rebbe himself. I would not be here today. I don't think I would have been connected to my own soul's mission were it not for the Rebbe. And the passion and the energy that I generate every day is a result of my great teacher and mentor, who actually touched my soul when I was a young man, 17 years old. And I still can be 17 just with a few years of experience. So I thank him for that, and I think all of us should embrace, and if you don't appreciate it yet, to study and demand from your rabbis and from your teachers to teach you a little about what this man taught, and you'll see how it empowers you to live up to your calling, so it can affect you, your families, communities. We should all be blessed with good health and nachas from our children and grandchildren, and all merit to that moment, which we hope is immediately of the final redemption that entire Jewish nation, from the beginning of time, the marathon of history, has been waiting for and hoping for. Thank you so much.
Is an experienced journalist with a demonstrated history of working in the broadcast media industry. She's a skilled broadcaster specializing in radio and television, as well as print and digital media. She's currently working as a Victoria journalist for the Return and Services League, the RSL. Prior to that, she now took 10 years at SBS, where she worked as cross-platform journalist and producer. Aline has worked in the ABC in Perth, a commercial radio network in Sydney, and as a WA correspondent for the Australian Jewish News. Aline graduated from West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, where she completed a postgraduate diploma in broadcasting, which followed her undergraduate degree in Edith Cowan University. Aline was born in South Africa, who wasn't, and immigrated to Australia in the late 1980s, where she lived in 4 cities: Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, and finally Melbourne. Are you here to stay?
I am.
Aileen is married to Alon Zlotnick, and together they are the parents to the most adorable chubby cheeks little girls, Ella, Kayla, and Zara. I've had the privilege to know Aileen for a number of years now. She is warm, intelligent, engaging, and down to earth. She will now lead us in the Q&A with Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Esther Malka. Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. And thank you, Rabbi, for sharing your very thought-provoking insights with us this evening. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Rabbi, I guess let's just start off firstly by clarifying, Judaism's been around for thousands of years. In our modern world today, why does Judaism and being Jewish matter, and how does it continue to be relevant today and not just practiced out of obligation?
Sure. I thought I just gave an hour talk on that topic. These questions were written before, but I guess that's fine. I'll just sum up some of what I said, but put it maybe in shorter terms. To me, Judaism, when I say to me, it's what I've learned and what I, especially from the Rebbe, Judaism is sometimes misunderstood. I think it's only for Jews. Yes, there's certain aspects that are only for Jews, the Jewish traditions like rituals, Shabbat, and other things. But the principles and the universal values of social justice, that every human being is created in the divine image, that we all have inalienable rights, these are fundamental Jewish principles for the entire world of 7.5 billion people. So I can't find anything more relevant, especially in our day and age, because we need moral direction. People are successful in business or successful in other arenas. I mentioned technology, but technology is neutral. How do you use it? How do you use it in an appropriate way? How do you use it in a way that is productive? So I think people will be surprised that when you look into Jewish thought, you'll find direct answers that address every aspect of life, not just, so to speak, religious life. Of course, does not preclude the fact that, yes, of course, Judaism talks about Shabbat, as I mentioned, Yom Kippur, Kashrut, laws of business, litigation, and so on. But I know, South Korea. Freudian slip. South Korea, they worship the Talmud. They think the Talmud is the most brilliant book. They study it in their schools. And frankly, most of legal law of the Western world is based on Talmudic law. So I think once you start digging deeper and you look into Jewish thought, you see its universal value. I'll just mention three books. There's a book called On Two Wings by Michael Novak, and a book called The Hebrew Republic. And a third book, The Gift of the Jews by Thomas Cahill. These are all books written by non-Jews who show the contribution of the Jews to concepts that we today consider we take for granted. Things like hope, optimism, destiny, synergy, etc., etc. So I can go on, but I think the point is that I believe Judaism is relevant more than ever today for the entire world and obviously for Jews.
You mentioned tonight, and I've heard in previous talks of yours, that you've spoken about the stage in history where there was no such thing for Jews as assimilation, and therefore making for a very strong, vibrant Jewish community, strong in their sense of identity, in values and culture. You also said, and you touched on it tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong in saying that you didn't have to tell your child that it's important to be a Jew. They just picked it up from the smell of the chicken soup in their grandmother's kitchen. So following on from that, Rabbi, in today's times where there is so much choice and freedom and temptation and distraction, what kind of tactics or methods do we need to see our Jewish leaders embrace or implement to keep the Jewish community engaged and motivated?
Okay, great question. I'll answer that both on a personal and a communal level. I'll start with the personal. First of all, even though we do have rabbis and educators and teachers, I think we cannot neglect the fact that each one of us is a leader in our own right. First of all, as parents, you're leaders in your home. Your children will be affected most in the earliest impressionable years by the parents, and then by their educators, and then by their social community, and so on. So I think parents have to take a very serious leadership role in maybe the greatest responsibility that we'll ever have, is shaping the future. The future is shaped in children. There was Frederick Douglass that said that it's infinitely easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. Trillions of dollars are being spent on therapy, fixing broken adults. And that's sad. But how much you can save when you bring up a healthy child. So on a very practical, simple level, it means giving them the time, the nurturing, the love, the validation, and not seeing your career or other things that you're doing as more important than shaping the life of a young, impressionable, innocent child. That's the greatest gift that a parent can have. And just on a practical level, let's take a Jewish tradition, talk about making Judaism relevant. Every morning we say Moda Ani, simple short prayer that says, thank you for returning my soul to me. Simple suggestion, let every parent in the morning say with their children that prayer. And take an extra minute or two and say, you're my special gift, my child, my son, my daughter. God sent you here for a purpose, for a mission. I am here like a gardener, ready to do everything possible to nurture and to help you cultivate and express your unique mission in this world. Imagine what kind of children will grow up hearing this every day, in the morning and the evening. Besides that, I love you and all other things that we say. It would make children think about responsibility. It would make them feel that they are important. In this big world where we can feel insignificant and depersonalized due to just the mere fact, 1 in 7.5 billion people, what difference can we make? That's a small thing that every parent can do. Obviously, this is just the minimum. You put your mind to it, you can do a lot more. And on a communal level, I think what I said earlier, which is completely straight from the way the Rebbe taught us, is take initiative. You're in a community. You see a problem, don't just say it's someone else's problem. Try to find a way to correct it. You see a lonely soul, invite them to a Shabbat meal or just have a conversation. Maybe initiate once a month a class in your home. Do things that bring light to the world. We are agents of light. We're not just here to take. And I think it's really about what we call simat lev in Hebrew, which means pay attention to care. If you care and you feel that responsibility, then you'll do things. If you think of yourself as, I'm a nobody, I'm a bystander, I'm just an observant guy, just observing, obviously we won't do. So I think it really comes down to that, and I'm sure if we put our heads together, we can come up with many more ideas. And maybe there should be a little competition of the best ideas of the week, of how we are agents of light and creating some change for the good. Don't ever underestimate what one person can achieve with one act. Today with physics, we know the butterfly effect. A small act can change the world. Which Maimonides said many years ago, that one act can tip the scale.
You've spoken a lot about the impact on technology, on religion, and it's a double-edged sword. I mean, it depends how it's channeled and how it's used, whether it's for good or for bad. What other elements are you seeing coming up that present as problems for Jewish people at the moment in the world, besides technology?
I don't know if technology is a Jewish problem, to be honest. Many Jews are making a lot of money on technology, so it's actually... technology is a challenge. It's a powerful force, like everything, like fire. If it's out of control, it controls you, that's trouble. If you control it, you can harness it. I mean, the challenges that we face as a Jewish people, number one, some people talk about a rise of anti-Semitism. Whether it's... We just had the Poway shooting, which I had the honor to be actually there a week afterwards, which already has made big headlines. And other attacks at Pittsburgh Synagogue and other places. I know many of us are concerned. Is there really a rising anti-Semitism, or has it always been around? I of the belief, and I take again the cue from the Rebbe never had a type of the word defensive posture about this. Never felt that we have to be panicking. We have to be prudent, obviously, and we have to do whatever it takes to be secure and protect ourselves in Israel and abroad. But the Rebbe's attitude was the best war against anti-Semitism is by being even a prouder Jew, because Judaism brings light to the world. You fight darkness with light, exactly as Rabbi Goldstein of Poway said. I know some people say, what, being naive? So I'm not suggesting, obviously, security, guards and so on, but that's not the key. The key is that we have to higher and heighten the moral standard of the world to make it intolerable for people of hate to dominate. To not allow a vacuum that young people can go on the internet and read all kinds of hate literature and anti-Semitic literature. The best way to do that is, yes, of course you have to arrest or prosecute and do the fullest extent anyone that propagates or in any way obviously attacks innocent people. But the preventive medicine is educating young people from the youngest age that not to be violent. And how do you do that? By teaching them that they have responsibility in this life, in this world. And that standard has to be heightened because unfortunately very much of the Western world is very ambiguous. Moral ambiguity. Basically, you have to give everybody a voice to the point where there's so much tolerance that you tolerate literally real hatred, and you don't respect the people who are actually fighting for good. Look at Israel in the media. Think of Israeli army, what kind of morale, what kind of standard they have. No one talks about that. They will talk about atrocities because that's the PR campaign. So I think it's about really heightening in every possible sector of the universe the importance of children, for children and adults to know that we are here to bring good to the world, and we don't not tolerate any other approach. Now, I'm sure there's a list of other things, but I'd like to rather talk a list of opportunities than a list of all our challenges, if you wish. But if someone has a particular challenge, we can discuss it. Okay.
Thank you. It brings me to my next, kind of a challenge that I think the Jewish community is facing, and that is one of education. As a mother of 3 children myself who are starting off on their education journey, I'm interested in your and the Rabbi's thoughts on Jewish education. Victoria has several private Jewish day schools offering Judaism at various observance levels, catering to a diverse cross-section of the Jewish community. I think, though, that the unfortunate reality here is that a private Jewish education is out of the financial means of many members of the community. How much of a key concern should this be to us, and in what ways do we move forward in fixing this problem?
Well, I could speak more ideologically on this. I don't know the practical realities on the ground here. Financial challenges as well as financial aid or opportunities the government or private foundations may provide. But let's just talk about the importance of it first. The Jewish education, in the broadest sense of the word, is not just to teach children about the laws of Judaism. That obviously is part of it. But it's more importantly to think like a Jew thinks, and to have a strong Jewish identity, and to understand exactly what we've been talking about tonight, that as a Jew, you are an initiator, you are a leader, that you are here to in some way improve the world to which you were sent. And that's a very strong sense of responsibility, almost like training a soldier in a army, but not in a physical army, in a spiritual army. And that is the foundation of Jewish education. As the Rebbe puts it, I have an entire chapter in my book on education. Education is not teaching facts. It's not data. It's not just knowledge. It's a way of life. It's personality shaping. You tell me, what's the most important thing when you're teaching a child? To know math or to be a mensch? Now, it's not a contradiction. You need both. But one are the tools. It's the tool chest. And one is know how to use the tools in the right direction. So real solid Jewish education is character development, personality shaping. Why are you here? To be a good giving person, not a selfish person. I remember I was in Sydney a number of years ago. It was right after the shooting in Columbine, Colorado, where a few students turned on their own friends and shot them to death and then killed themselves. And they were not insane. They were completely normal kids. So I was at the Moriah School in Sydney. And Friday there was a session, an optional session. Whoever wanted to attended. Over 200 students came, boys and girls. And they actually asked the faculty not to come in the room. They wanted to talk privately with me. So I opened up. I said, do you think something like what happened in Columbine could happen, God forbid, here? I just wanted to see their thinking. I was sure they were going to say no. America, violence, not here. We are a different type of people. We're Jews, etc. Most of them raised their hands and said, yes, they think it's completely possible. And I asked them, how? How could you say that? Would you see yourself or someone turning on each other, God forbid, killing each other? They said, yeah, because, I started going through the different reasons. Some of them were childish reasons, but a few of the kids said something really powerful. They say, we don't think life is that significant today. And people see violent video games, and they see violence in the media, and it becomes like, it's like almost like a game. So when you don't think your life matters that much, so you don't think your other people's lives matter that much, not to say that means immediately someone's going to become an assassin, but you're already weakening that type of absolute dignity that's not possible to touch another person. So in that sense, when I think of that, I can't see a more important time to teach our children this. And this is the essence of what a Jewish education is. Now, from my point of view, in public schools they should teach that as well. But since you're asking about Jewish education, now once you know it's that important and not optional, then you figure out the means how to do it, financially and otherwise. And obviously we have to put our heads together. If we think it's that important, maybe we have to create some type of fund or other ways of helping subsidize those that have difficulty sending children to that type of school. This is, of course, in addition to Jewish identity, which we all know is the strongest way of assuring that your children will perpetuate Jewish life and not allow it to assimilate or worse.
Recently in the Jewish media here, the Australian Jewish News, there was an article about a recent movement to see Jewish women equally represented in positions of leadership at events within the community and on boards. It's called the Make Space for Her campaign. I want to know, how do you see the role of women in Judaism in the 21st century, and does religion need to get with the times, so to speak?
I would say the times need to get with Judaism. I'll tell you why. For some reason, as some of it I alluded to earlier, the Jewish principles around women and men, for that matter, are very different than what most people think they are. You tell me an event in history, in Jewish history, and especially a crisis, especially difficult times, and you will never see a situation where a woman doesn't take a leadership role. Whether it was the women in Egypt, and their merit, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. Whether it was Esther, the queen, the entire Purim is called Megillas Esther. What happened to Mordechai? Actually, I know some men who wanted to sue and say, hey, what happened to the men? Mordechai had a role in this thing. And the Megillah is called the Megillah Esther. Hanukkah, and you go through history. So I think what's happened, maybe, I don't know when and at what point, for some reason, maybe distorted men who decided to subjugate women and minimize their role of leadership. Now, it was always, obviously, in a modest way and in a godly way. It wasn't a promiscuous way. But Jewish women have always been leaders. Why don't you come to my home? You tell me who's running the show. You know? I always thought I wasn't, frankly. Just recently, I've come to discover that the men wear the pants, but the women tell them what pants to wear. So, and then I realized that Jews have been this way from the beginning of time. Now, I'm not minimizing the role of men. Some of my best friends are men, you know, including myself. But I'm not making the joke. But the truth is, I'm not saying this in any tongue-in-cheek way. Women have always been prominent leaders, but in their own way. Not necessarily the Western model. A leader does not necessarily mean that there has to be necessarily an equal CEO in a company, which that doesn't mean they shouldn't be. But a leader is a leader that shapes communities, that shapes the world. And women, Jewish women, that were living up to what the Torah asked of them, that's exactly what they were doing. I never seen this in any way secondhand or second-class citizens. So I find, and not challenging your question, I actually find it offensive when people say to me, Judaism has to adjust to the times. I say, who brought civilization to the world, my friend? You know, when you're busy still eating each other alive in cannibalism, Jews were talking about social justice and freedoms, and women had roles that people would never even imagine. So when I hear about the Me Too movement, I always say, Me Too, that you too were abused? Why don't you say, Me Too, I will be a leader in heightening the standard of sexuality and intimacy in this world. That I see as a Me Too. See? That's what happens when you attack men. The trap door. So I'll suffice it like I said. Okay, there you go.
Thank you very much. Good answer. Thank you. I guess I'm conscious of the time, Rabbi, and so I'd just like some insight as well.
Curfew in Melbourne, is there a curfew?
Just regarding your book, Rabbi, some of the reviews have called it life-changing, an interesting read with some valuable insights, and one review even said, if you can only read one book on Jewish faith, make it this one. Can you please tell us, what do you believe it is about your book that struck a chord with so many readers, and what's the secret to its great success?
That's a little self-serving, but I'll try my best. Honestly, when I wrote the book, it was definitely a book meant to be, because it came easier than many other things that I did in my life. You know, the things at the right time, in the right place, and I think it was driven by my very clear and focused sense that people did not appreciate who the Rebbe was. I would meet people all the time. They say, "This great Rebbe of yours you talk about, is there a book to read?" So I say, "Yeah, it's in Hebrew, and Hebrew lessons will be $20,000." You know, that idea. And there were really no book, and I really felt that I really felt like actually pain by the fact that I and so many others who were exposed to the Rebbe's teachings saw it as transformative, personally and globally. So that was the driving force. And I think when you write a book and you have that type of focus, it adds a certain dimension that's not really tangible, but it creates that sense of urgency. Second thing was, I actually asked people in the street, what are the 30 most important topics in their lives? And everybody has the same 30. Men, women, children, Jews, non-Jews, different ages. It's just different cycles in life, different emphasis. But everybody has the same needs. They want to know. And I wrote a chapter on each one of those. I think that relevance, that it addresses real issues that everybody deals with. So you're already beginning on terms. You're not trying to sell them an idea they never heard of. These are all ideas you already heard of. And here's another perspective from the Rebbe through Torah and Siddur on this topic. I think those are the main things. And I'm sure there's some other factors. I made sure to write it not in a philosophical, third-person way. Just a funny anecdote I'll share with you. I got a letter from a professor at the University of Chicago who said to me when my book came out, he says, it's an interesting book, but it's really for, written very, for simple people. And I know exactly what he was talking about because when I began writing the book, I first wrote it for academics. And then I realized when my publisher told me academics are the most closed-minded people on earth, so why are you writing for them? So I changed it from the third person to the first person, to the second person. In other words, you and I. Instead of saying one thinks about higher purpose, I wrote you think about higher purpose. So I decided to put this guy in his place. So I said to him, your point is well taken, and my book is for simple people, but I'd like to send you a draft that I wrote. Tell me what you think about this. I took the exactly same chapter, and I just changed it into, instead of you want a life of purpose, one wants a life of purpose. Which right away turns into very dry and academic, which I know exactly the language that they use to make it very elitist. He writes me back, brilliant! The best thing I've ever written. Why don't you write a book like that? And I wrote him back. I said, it's exactly my book. I just changed you to one. Great, good professor. Anyway.